Just Imagine, a new podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again, how are you? My name is Martin Ballard. Welcome to episode 6 of this series of podcasts from Imagine Theatre, one of the UK's biggest producer of pantomime and children's theatre. Now, if you've listened to the first 5 episodes, you'll know by now that we take you behind the scenes at the company, meeting the people who create and star in Imagine Theatre shows.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
Now, before we start, a reminder that if you've missed any of the previous episodes, don't forget you can catch up with them at any time. In episode 4, we met the singer and actress, winner of the 10th series of X Factor, Sam Bailey. This time, I've been joined by the award-winning theatre producer, arts advocate and chief executive at the Eden Court Arts Complex in Inverness, James Mackenzie Blackman. How are you, James?
I'm all right, thanks. It's a beautiful day here in the Highlands. I'm looking out of the window onto rolling hills and sunshine.
Now, obviously, it's very challenging for everybody during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we'll talk about that in a moment's time. But I want to start with your formative years. It's a far cry from the Highlands because it all started for you in Devon, didn't it? And Plymouth, which is where your love of theatre began.
Yeah, that's right. I was born in Plymouth and brought up in Plymouth, and all my family is still there in the southwest of the United Kingdom. I mean, look, there's actually quite a lot of similarities between the organisation that I'm running now and the organisation that I fell in love with at the Theatre Hall in Plymouth, both kind of serving both the city community and then bringing people to the venue from more of a rural context. As in my teenage years, my family moved outside of the city centre and we were living kind of on the edge of Dartmoor, and I was travelling into the city. So yes, my love and my passion is in regional venues, and so yes, I'm at the other end of the country now, here in the Highlands of Scotland, but yeah, there's things that connect those two experiences for sure.
And I guess it was really inspired initially by the youth theatre there, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I was in the Theatre Royal Plymouth Youth. It was called the Youth Music Theatre when I started, then it became the Young Company. But yeah, I had really transformative experiences when I was a teenager in that young company, making big summer musicals. Most summers, I really found my tribe at youth theatre and made friends for life. I was good at school. I was academically bright, but school wasn't where I was at wasn't where I was happiest. I was definitely happiest when I was at youth theatre, and by my late teenage years and into my early 20s, I just felt pretty comfortable that I wanted to have a career making opportunities happen for other young people like that had been provided to me.
You talk about the Friends for Life. One of those Friends for Life just happens to be a mutual friend, and she told me about Bugsy Malone and the Lost Domain and trips to Poland, amongst other places.
Yeah, who's that?
I'll tell you that in a moment's time. But do you remember those shows?
Yeah, of course. Really clearly, like I said, those formative years in youth theatre. And getting, what was extraordinary about the Theatre Royal's Youth Theatre back then was that they were really placing young people into a professional theatre context. And that's what felt like such a privilege. And, I think I probably in my early teens wanted to have a career as a performer, but then as my teens developed, I just got to discover all these other people that were responsible for making theatre happen, and increasingly felt more interested in all of those offstage and backstage jobs than I did with the onstage ones.
Yeah, it's interesting at the age of 16, because I'm told that you told your career advisor at school that your dream was to actually be head of an education department, or the head of education in general, in a building-based theatre, which is exactly what you are in effect.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's what I told my careers advisor, and that was really very much about recognising that I wanted a career where I made opportunities happen for young people, like the opportunities that had been made for me. So yeah, that's kind of where I set my sights, and I was lucky enough to find myself doing that job at the Lyric Hammersmith in London in my late 20s. Actually, at that point, thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? Yeah.
Well, the Friend for Life, by the way, is Sarah Barton. And
yeah.
she told me how inspired you were by the stuff that you did there. And you actually went on to become executive director at the National Youth Theatre, I think, following that as well, didn't you, later on? So that's a passion of yours. But she also said that, the support of your parents, your mum in particular, was incredible, on those, early days, that journey starting out.
Yeah, look, I'm incredibly fortunate to have had a family that fostered and supported my love for the performing arts. My grandfather was in the Gilbert and Sullivan Society, and going to the theatre was something that, as a family, was a real treat, a real thrill, and I was doing from a very early age. My very earliest memories are being absolutely terrified of King Rat at Dick Whittington, probably age sort of 4 or 5, at the Theatre Hall in Plymouth, and being one of those cute kids that went up on stage with Dusty Bin just before the walk down. So those are really, really important memories of mine, and I'm very lucky to have had a family that encouraged and fostered that passion, and did a lot of driving and did all the lifts, and because of the geographical context in which Plymouth existed, all the kind of young people were being pulled from all over Devon and Cornwall to be in that youth theatre. So I imagine what Sarah's responding to is that most weekends our house would be full of young people and kids who'd lived a bit further away that were staying the night between rehearsals.
So in those early days, you mentioned Dick Whittington. Was that the very first panto you ever saw?
I'm pretty sure it was, yeah. And I remember really vividly being sat in the stalls, which was a treat because we would normally sit in the dress circle or the upper circle, but we were sat in the stalls, and we were quite near the edge of the row. And King Rat made his entrance into the auditorium, and I was absolutely terrified. I shot under my seat, and I think I stayed there for most of the show, occasionally sort of peering up. And Mum thinks I was probably sort of 4 or 5 years old at that point. Yeah.
Wow. And education obviously continued, University of Liverpool and so on. At what stage did you, in your own mind, realise, what sort of career pattern you wanted?
I knew from my late teens that I wanted to work in theatre buildings, and I wanted to run, my biggest ambition was to run an education department in a building-based venue. And actually I say that I kind of had 3 ambitions in my late teens, if I'm perfectly honest. One was that I wanted to work in theatre, one was that I wanted to be a Blue Peter presenter, and the third one was that I wanted to be a head teacher of a school, because young people in school and education is something that I'm, to this day very passionate about. So I'm definitely too old to be a Blue Peter presenter, but maybe one day I'll run a school. Who knows?
Hey James, never say never. Blue Peter could still be an option. Who knows in the future?
I think that's way off the cards.
Greenwich Theatre was the first job, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, so after university in Liverpool, moved to London, desperately trying to find my first job in the performing arts. And I was working at Topshop in Oxford Circus, which was a completely miserable experience, desperately applying for jobs in the arts, and then got a job at Greenwich Theatre and working in the education and marketing department there, and that's where I kind of cut my cloth. And not long after I arrived at Greenwich, they secured quite a significant amount of funding to start a musical theatre academy, predominantly for Black and minority ethnic young people in southeast London. And so, that project started, and that kind of really threw me in at the deep end. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing we haven't mentioned is, I mentioned Poland with the youth theatre at an early age, but travel's been key as well. And gaining those life experiences, for people working in theatre, that's invaluable, isn't it? But you spent a couple of years working overseas, didn't you?
Yeah, and actually up until very recently, travel, both kind of nationally and internationally, was a really big part of my role and my job. So in the 6 years that I was at Matthew Bourne's New Adventures, incredibly lucky. I mean, New Adventures is a prolific touring company, touring more than any other UK dance company. And so it meant that I would, get to visit most large-scale regional theatres across the UK once a year. And then when New Adventures wasn't touring in the UK, it was probably touring overseas. So I got to visit some of the world's leading venues, from the Kennedy Center in Washington, Armstrong Theatre in Los Angeles, Esplanade in Singapore, Shanghai Cultural Square, Sydney Opera House, or Art Centre Melbourne. So, incredibly fortunate to have had all of those experiences, and formative without a doubt. Yeah.
So, as we now know, your career eventually took you north of the border to Eden Court, and of course you're married to a Scot now as well. But there may be many people listening to this who may have heard of Eden Court, but certainly haven't visited it. They may not know that it has galleries, a cinema, a theatre, a studio, and so on. So just give us an overview.
It's an extraordinary building on the banks of the River Ness in the city of Inverness. It spans 3 centuries. I sort of describe it as architecturally schizophrenic. We have a building, and the organisation is called Eden Court because the anchor building was the original home of the bishop of the region, and the Eden Court is next door to the cathedral. So we have a building from the 1800s, and then that building was attached to a building in the late 70s, which is our main house auditorium. And then in 2004, Eden Court closed for a £25 million capital project. So at that point, all of the public space was reimagined to kind of art house cinemas. Independent cinemas were added, as well as a studio theatre, 2 beautiful dance studios that look out onto the river, and we've got exhibition space for visual art too, and a restaurant and a bar and a bistro. So it's a really big building. I guess some ways that I describe it for people listening in England is a bit like a Lowry in terms of that kind of multi-art form, one site venue. Yeah.
And like any art centre, any complex, any theatre like that, it has to be, and Eden Court certainly is, the heartbeat of the community. So how much of an impact was it to you and the people of Inverness and beyond when COVID-19 hit and you had to close your doors?
Yeah, I mean, goodness, it was incredibly difficult. And I guess, the other thing to say to sort of paint the picture of Eden Court and of our organisation is that, we're not like one of those, a theatre that opens its doors at 6:50 in the evening and in flood the people, or it's not a building that only starts getting busy at 6:50 of an evening for a 7:30 show. Eden Court, before we closed for the pandemic, was open sort of 362 days a year, and from 9 o'clock in the morning it would be busy with people taking part in classes or workshops, and young people getting qualifications, people visiting the cafe bar. Very public building, basically. So it was in the way it has been for everyone in the industry. It was completely devastating to close, and I sat all of the staff down in the stalls on that day that we shut our doors, and I, like everyone else, genuinely thought it would be 6 to 8 weeks. And then we'd get back going again. So to now be sat in 2021, it feels sort of almost extraordinary that we've now passed the 1-year anniversary. We did get open for 8 weeks at the end of last year before that big second wave. But yeah, kind of it feels like we've been the building has been close to the public for a long time. We've done an awful lot through the pandemic that we're very proud of, but not to be open to the general public has been really, really tough.
And again, for anybody who's south of the border or is listening to this outside Scotland, obviously it was slightly different in Scotland, and you were in level 1, which meant that you were ready to open, and you did open, as you say, for 8 weeks. And so it was a bit of a stop-start existence for you. And you did actually get funding, I think, through the Scottish government. You got funding ahead of people in England, didn't you?
Yes, we did, I think. I mean, you could get, your research is amazing. But yes, I think that we did. I think we got Scottish Government announced the Performing Arts Venue Relief Fund. I think it was a matter of days before the Cultural Recovery Fund was announced. So yes, we had a little bit of there was a window where we had a degree of stability and security before colleagues in England. But the funding model, the recovery model, has been very different in Scotland because there's been a number of pots of different scales that we've been able to access, as opposed to being, a lot of the bigger organisations in England have taken receipt of very big chunks of money in one go, and it's not felt like that in Scotland. There's been a lot of funding applications and advocacy to do over the course of the last year.
And certainly it would seem, and I think you've been on the record as saying that the Culture Secretary has been particularly supportive.
Yeah, we're very lucky in Scotland to have a Cabinet Secretary in Fiona Hislop, who, I won't get her title completely right, but it's something like Economy, Fair Work and Culture. But Fiona Hislop has been Cabinet Secretary for Culture for a number of years, and she's incredibly knowledgeable about the sector and about the industry and about the specific issues affecting both the building-based infrastructure, the touring infrastructure, and independent and freelance artists. And we all feel incredibly lucky to have landed into this crisis with a Cabinet Secretary in the Scottish Government who understands the industry so well. Yeah, that's definitely helped.
So difficult times. You've obviously spent a lot of time working on different scenarios, what happens if, that sort of thing. But while all that's been going on, the Eden Court complex has been a real heartbeat of the community still, because you've been involved in all sorts of aid effort, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. Back in March 2020, when the crisis descended, we knew we were going to run out of cash very, very quickly. And this was before the job retention scheme was announced. But we essentially agreed to enter into a partnership with the local authority to support their humanitarian response to the pandemic. And we did that in a number of ways. So our box office telephony system, which is web-based, that became an emergency helpline for Highland residents. Our main house auditorium became the humanitarian aid centre to the region, so sending out food parcels across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland to people experiencing food poverty or people who were shielding. Our engagement team went to support the delivery of teaching and learning in key worker childcare hubs. So yeah, we embedded ourselves really deeply in the humanitarian response to the pandemic.
Just on a personal note, how challenging has it been for you personally? Apart from anything else, you've got 2 boys, I think, so homeschooling had to come into it as well, did it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't... I've done a couple of interviews now where people have said, like, how's it been for me personally? And I guess what I feel on that really is I still feel like we're in the midst of the emergency. We're just in a different moment of it now. We're kind of trying to work out how we recover, at what speed we recover, what's going to be possible when. And it's been personally hugely challenging for the reasons you said. I've got 2 little boys, so homeschooling has been huge. I've not been furloughed. My husband has not been furloughed from his job, so we've been balancing all of that, our jobs in crisis with the pandemic. And I guess what I feel a little bit is I'm hopeful that in the fullness of time, probably not for a year or so, there'll be some looking back and some sort of a realization of, oh my goodness, I can't quite believe that we got through that, or processing of it. But it still feels a little bit early, I think. Yeah, whilst it still feels we're in the middle of it.
There's still much to be decided yet, and the so-called roadmap that governments talk about, there still could be turnings that you miss or junctions that you come up against and have to have difficult decisions made. But I know, for instance, that you're very much involved in a panel which is coming together digitally in June on the future of theatre, because it's a really good time to look to the future, to take stock and make some key decisions, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that we owe it to the industry, and we owe it to the people that are going to be the custodians of the sector in the years to come, to make some of the radical and important changes now when we're rebuilding. And it's It's also fair to acknowledge, though, that with doing things differently becomes a lot of challenge and pain for some. But I think it's really important that as we rebuild, we do that in a way that starts to deal with some of the significant challenges and issues that we've been talking about for a long time, and now we can't avoid getting on and sorting some key issues out for sure.
Yeah, this is a 3-day event, and you'll be talking about all sorts of things, audiences, buildings, and so on. So it's a really important gathering of minds, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And it will be important to talk amongst ourselves, but I think probably the most important conversations that we've got to have as a sector are with audiences and with artists as we begin the recovery. Because, what I feel... is sort of without question, is that there'll come a moment where the public money will run out, or we'll be told that that's us, let's get on with it. And probably the greatest degree of risk for Eden Court and for other building-based organisations going forward will be that moment where we have a valid programme on our stages, a programme that we're proud of, and the success and the viability of organisations like Eden Court will be based on whether or not people come or not.
Now, one of the saddest times for theatres up and down the UK was when Panto didn't happen. And I saw back in December, your Damon, forgive me, I can't remember his name. He actually wrote,
Steve Wren. Yeah.
He wrote a love letter to the spirit of Panto, which pretty much summed it up for me. Very emotional time, wasn't it?
It really was. I'm so aware, because it was my own lived experience, of the importance of going to the Panto for families across the United Kingdom. It's such an important moment in so many people's years that the need to cancel Panto felt momentous, weighed very heavily on my shoulders. So, we're absolutely determined that this year that won't be the case, unless, if government for some reason mandate we need to be closed, nothing we can do about it. But we are exploring all different types of scenarios that will enable Panto to happen this Christmas at Eden Court.
So 3 final questions to finish with. James, the first is, what overall is your favourite Panto title?
Oh, what a great question. What is my favourite Panto title? Well, I'm going to say Cinderella, because that's Panto this Christmas at Eden Court. It gives some really great opportunity for, beautiful stage spectacle, and I really need the people of the Highlands and Islands to come. So I'm going to say Cinderella.
Okay, now the second question is something, whether it be in your career or in shows that you've been involved with, maybe in the youth theatre or even, in present times at Eden Court, when was it not all right on the night? When did something go wrong that you can look back on now and have a laugh about?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. And what immediately springs to mind is it's actually an experience as an audience member. And I think for a birthday present or a Christmas present from my grandparents when I was in, probably 10 or 11 years old, they bought tickets for us to go and see Philip Schofield in Joseph at the Bristol Hippodrome as a day trip. I remember it really vividly. It was a brilliant day. It was a brilliant show. And we settled back down for Act 2 with our ice creams, and the safety curtain wouldn't go up. And we sat there and we kept seeing the safety curtain going up about 3 inches, then falling back down. And I was completely in heaven at this sort of on-stage disaster. I was fascinated by what was going to happen. And eventually what happened, the safety curtain couldn't go back up. The company came out onto the apron of the stage and just sang through Act 2, and I just adored it. So yeah, that's the thing that immediately springs to mind for when it didn't go all right on the night.
Wow, that's got to be the safest safety curtain ever.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay, and finally, we've talked about, your love of theatre, and obviously you've been very much involved in youth projects. I didn't mention the 2012 Olympics, by the way, which I think you were involved with as well, but young people, very, very important. So I wanted to know finally why Panto is so important to you and is all about engaging with kids. Is that what it is?
I think so, but I think probably what I love about Panto is the fact that it just brings people to the theatre who don't go at any other time of the year. That's a whole other issue that probably we could do a podcast on. But I love the kind of the madness of the tradition. I love how kind of eccentrically British it is in many ways, how kind of I love the fact it's kind of completely misunderstood anywhere else in the world, and if you try to explain it to people overseas, as I've tried, they sort of look at you as if you're crazy. And I also really enjoy how, as an art form, it's continued to evolve over recent years, and how that audience has remained pretty buoyant over the decades, really. So, yeah, that's why I love Panto. And increasingly, what I would say about why I love it at the moment is that my boys are 7 and 4, and it's a great joy to see how much they love it too.
Yeah, and interesting. I don't know whether Panto will even come up when you talk about the future of theatre this summer, but, you know, it has to carry on evolving, doesn't it? Let's face it, times are changing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, what's great about the Panto producers across the UK is there really does seem to be a will and a desire to make that change happen.
Well, you've talked about, you know, Cinderella this Christmas, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that we'll be able to bring Panto to everybody all across the UK again, hopefully. But in the meantime, what's the roadmap look like for you at Eden Court? Do you have any sort of stages of reopening coming up now?
Yeah, so we really want to get open this summer. We for the 2 years before COVID, we'd put a huge stretch tent on our lawn and had an outdoor summer music festival, and we're determined to make that happen this year. So yeah, the plan is a summer of outdoor music and live events, and then to slowly move indoors into the autumn, and to, fingers crossed, work towards an absolutely fabulous Panto at Christmas.
And the logistics of that are incredible because of the social distancing aspects, the wearing of masks, the safety, and so on. I guess most of your time has been spent on Zoom meetings and so on, trying to organise things like that. Yeah,
I think. I mean, today's a good example. I think like you're one of 9 meetings today, or 9 conversations. I'm completely over and bored out of my brain of working from home. I can't wait to go back to work. So I think the First Minister has said that there'll be a gradual reopening of offices from mid-June. So yeah, I just want to be back at Eden Court with my colleagues and with the general public. Yeah.
Well, listen, it's been a pleasure. It's great to catch up with you. I wish you all the best for the rest of this year. Hope to see your doors open again soon. James, thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you, James. Well, let me just tell you that just about brings the curtain down on episode 6. Don't forget you can still listen to any of the previous episodes, so make sure you subscribe through your favourite podcast app. In the meantime, make sure you join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 7 of Just Imagine, when I'll be talking to television and theatre director, producer, presenter, writer, actor and pantomime dame Ian Lachlan. I'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.